Okay, so today I want to show you how to draw a timeline correctly. A timeline is very important in history class, and so you must know how to do it the right way. Every timeline that you will do in history class must have a title. You must always use a ruler when you're drawing your timeline. This is so that you have a nice straight line, and also to help you to calculate the proportions of your timeline. The other thing that every timeline needs to have is a time period. So you need to state whether the years we're looking at are BC or AD. In history class, almost everything we do this year is going to be in BC. But so you know, for next year, AD means Anno Domini, which is Latin, which means the year of our Lord. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a very simple timeline where the proportions of the timeline will be equal. So what we'll do is draw a reasonably straight line. You put arrows at each end because the time continues in both directions, into the past and into the future. The title, which the title is going to be John's life events. And over here, I'm going to put the time period, which is AD, okay? This way I don't have to write it beside every year that I put. The next thing we do is divide it into equal parts. I'm going to show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different events. So we need to divide the timeline more or less equally into 6 parts. You would do it with a ruler to make sure it's more or less equal, but I'm just going to do it freehand. So hopefully I get it right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I'm just going to show 5 events because I didn't plan it very well. The first event is going to be when he's born, which would be in 1990. And here I can write born. The next event will be 5 years later in 1995, and I can write bike because when he's 5 years old he learns to ride a bike. The next year is going to be the year 2000. I'm going to write French because he learned to speak, or he started to learn to speak French. The next year is 2005. I'm going to write abroad because it will be the first time he went abroad on holidays. The next event is going to be 2010, which is when he started university. I'm just going to write it in shorthand, uni. And actually I can fit in the last event here, even though it's a little bit cramped. 2015, let's write first job. Okay, so this is a very simple timeline where all the spaces here equal 5 years of time. Okay, so everything is even. Also, each event on the timeline is one event that has happened in one moment. Okay, it's just showing that exactly at this point on the timeline he learned to ride a bike, or exactly at this moment on the timeline he went to university. Okay, but what if the timeline and the events that you have to show in the timeline are more complicated? So for example, if I wanted to show some of the main events in Picasso's life, Picasso is a famous Spanish artist, you may have heard of him, we can't just do the timeline with each section showing an equal amount of time. We have to do a little bit of maths first. So let's say these are the events I'm going to include. That Picasso was born in 1881. The next thing I want to include is that between 1901 and 1904, he had a period of painting called the Blue Period. And let's just put one more thing to make it simple. In 1937, he painted one of his most famous paintings called Guernica. Now, there's quite a long period of time to cover between 1881 and 1937, so it wouldn't make sense to show every single year on the timeline. We have to decide how to divide the timeline, and also another important thing here is how to show this period of time because it begins in one place and ends in another. So in the next slide I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so the first year on the timeline would be 1881 when he's born, and the last year is 1937. So the number of years that have passed between these two dates is 56. The way you can calculate it is by doing a simple sum of taking 1 year away from the other, okay? So 1937 minus 1881 leaves you with 56. Then I would decide, okay, maybe if I show each section as 5-year periods, then I need more or less 11 periods, okay? One will be uneven, because if I divide by 5, I get 11. And that's how I know how I will section my timeline. And now here's how the timeline's going to look. So I'm going to write Pablo Picasso as my title. I'm going to take my ruler and draw a lovely straight line. As you can see, I'm using squared paper, so that makes the proportions much easier to calculate than if I use a normal piece of paper. We decided to divide it into about 11 equal parts. So this is the first event and the last event, and in between, let me just see how many squares there are. There are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, and I need to have 11 sections. So I should leave it at about 2 and a bit. Let's make it about 3. So 1 here, 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 and 1 here. And we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sections. Okay, it'll do for the moment. Here I'm going to put the year of the first event, 1881. And I'll use another color to show the next event, which was 1901. So this is 1881. The next line shows 5 years on, which is 1886, and the next one shows 1901. So I put 1901 here, and this time period continued until 1904. The next black line would be 5 years on, which is 1906. So 1904 is very close to it, maybe here. So I draw a line up to show, and I put the year. And then you can color in this section because it shows that the event lasted from this point, the first point where it says 1901, and the second point in 1904. Okay, let me just do that again. And finally, what we wanted to show, again in another color, was when he painted Guernica, which is 1937. So if this line here is 1906, the next one's 1911, the next one is 1916, the next one is 1921, the next one is 1926, the next one is 1931, and the next one is 1937. So I'm going to put it here. If you prefer, you can fill in all the years between 1904 and 1937, but it's not absolutely necessary. And then the next thing that you should do is make a little legend down the bottom. This helps in case you have a lot of text to fill in, okay? So that you can follow easier the timeline. So what I would do here is put a little red dot, and I would put birth, okay? So then I know that the red on the timeline means that he was born. I'll put a little green dot below, and I will write blue period because that means the painting style between those years was the blue period. And finally I'll put my little purple dot here, and I will write Guernica because that's when he painted Guernica. And now you should be able to see how you can make all the proportions of your timeline more or less correct, how you can show an event that has happened for a duration on a timeline, how to make a legend, and I think that's about it. I forgot something that hopefully you have noticed. We didn't put the time period, so I'm going to put it up here, AD, because this is when Picasso was around. So finally, I'm going to show you an actual history timeline that we'll be using in class. The title is going to be The Stone Age because it's going to show the different time periods that made up the Stone Age. Okay, there were 3 main ones. I put my title, I take my ruler and draw a lovely straight line. I put my arrows at each end because time continues in both directions. Up here I'm going to put BC because what I'm showing happened before Christ. And now I'm going to divide it into sections. When we're showing prehistory, timelines can be very complicated because they have to show a long period of time. The first event on my timeline actually happens in 2.5 million years before Jesus Christ. So 2.5 million years before Jesus Christ. And it continues all the way up until 8,000 years before Christ. Okay, so it's a long time period. So I've drawn where it begins, where it ends, and I connect the two to show where it starts and where it ends. What you can also do here is put this sort of symbol in the middle, which just shows that it's a very long time period being shown in a small area. The next event I'm going to put is the last period, which also starts in 8,000 and goes on to 3,500. And finally, there's an overlapping period, which I have to show. One that goes in between the purple one and the blue one. It begins around 10,000 and it ends around 6,000. Okay, so we can actually show when events overlap. And I put here the dates. 10,000 and here I'll put 6,000. Now I need to do the legend so you know what each of these things actually means. So down here I put the legend. I'll take purple first because it's the first period. I do my little dot and I write Old Stone Age. Okay, so you should be able to tell from the timeline that the Old Stone Age began at 2.5 million years before Christ and ended 8,000 years before Christ. And the next period that overlaps with the Old Stone Age is the orange one, and it's the Middle Stone Age. Now is a good time for you to think why the Middle Stone Age actually starts during the Old Stone Age. Okay, we'll discuss it in class, but try and think up a reason as to why you think it starts during the Old Stone Age and ends during the New Stone Age, which is the blue. It's definitely worth a positive if you can get the answer correct. And there we go. We've got it all done, nice, neat, and clear. Hopefully this has helped you and you'll be able to do it yourself in class. Thanks.